Welcome everybody to Contemporary Issues class here on another sunny Sunday in March. And we're going to talk today about voter suppression and gerrymandering. Ron Puning is going to give us a timely presentation on that because this week there has been a House bill to try and nationalize the same election procedures across the country, and that's going on at the same time. Many states are instituting their own plans for voter procedures, and it's caused quite the rift between the Republicans and the Democrats, with each of them doing what they think is best to turn out the vote for their side. So we're going to have a good discussion on that. But first, usual announcements. Please mute yourself in the lower left corner of your screen. So we cut the background noise, and I can do that too. While I'm talking here, I'm muting some of us. And also we are recording this for future playback. And be kind to each other in your comments. This is not a place to challenge each other or the speaker, but we do that later in a different format. So with that, we'll go on to things in the news. Did the Boulder shooting happen last Monday? Was it last Monday? What a deal. That is sad. I thought about talking about that today, but I think we'll talk about that in a week or two and go back and revisit that issue, because there's always new things going on, new perspectives that we can bring in. And unfortunately, it's a continuing issue with us and probably will be for a long time. Anybody have any thoughts on that? Would you like to talk about mass shootings and gun control again? Yeah. Everybody want to? Sometimes I wonder if we get tired of talking about that, but
well, it seems nothing can be done about it because nothing ever changes.
But it feels good to talk about it.
I don't know what talking about, but I wanted to voice one thing. Did anybody, this one like crossed the line for me. Maybe it was being in a grocery store. It really hit me hard. That you get emotional to get, but like, oh my gosh, I mean, that's just too close to, I mean, we all go shopping, you know what I mean? And it's scary. This like crossed the line for me. You know what I mean by that? It just,
yeah, Bob, when I went to King Soopers a couple days later, it was like a somber feeling, or at least there was for me. It was quieter and fewer people there, and it was like a sad reminder.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I went to the theater after Aurora theater shooting, I always looked for the exits. Yeah. I always made sure I knew where the exits were. And it's like, I'm starting to do that in King Super. Like, how do I, even Costco, how do I get out of here? Even Costco, walking around Walmart, Costco, and, it's crazy. Anyways, wow, I don't know if anybody, Jesus.
Steve, I was shopping while they were shooting. While he was shooting up there, and I was shopping here on University and Dry Creek, and the people, and I had to go back because he charged me twice for an item, and they could not have been more gracious. I didn't know it was happening, didn't happen to have the radio on in my car, and the one lady was so gracious, took me over to the service desk. And everybody was unbelievable. And then on my way home, then I heard what had happened, and I couldn't believe how gracious and professional everybody was, knowing that this was all happening up in Boulder. I was very impressed.
Thanks
for sharing. Before we have a discussion on this, you all have to visit a gun shop and just take a look at what people can buy.
Good idea.
It will scare you to death.
Yeah, how easy it is to buy.
Well, what's available to buy is what I think is one of the major concerns.
Terry, are they selling bazookas yet? That's the next thing.
Well, you know how they can do that. There's what you call a ghost gun. And a ghost gun, you can buy all the parts and assemble it yourself. And therefore, you can avoid currently all the restrictions in buying a gun.
Mhm. Well, good topic here. Obviously, there's interest and a lot we can talk about. Maybe Ron and I will work together on gun presentation, because it's good to remind us of the groups at work and the issues at work, and we'll look at that. Okay, thank you, everybody. Ron, thanks for this very timely topic too. So we will have lots of questions too. I know you'll leave time for questions, but it's a great topic on what's fair in voting today. Thank you, Ron.
Okay, thank you, everyone. All right, one of my favorite cartoons there, worth watching. Let's get right into it, though. So we step ahead. Here's the voter turnout for the presidential election that we just had. Notice I'm very proud of Colorado. We came in second behind Minnesota. Minnesota had an 80% voter turnout. Colorado 76.4, just behind us, Maine 76.3. The Pacific Northwest always does well. And it's interesting, the states that did rather the poorest on turnout, Oklahoma and Arkansas. And notice the difference between Colorado and Oklahoma. They had 55% turnout. We had 76.4 turnout. So this certainly shows you, at least from a popular vote standpoint, turnout is critically important. All right, now comes the question, well, why would anybody engage in voter suppression? The answer, to gain and hold disproportionate political power. By disproportionate, we mean a number of representatives that's not commensurate with the percentage of votes you got. If you hold 22 seats in a legislature, when percentage-wise the vote you got is much, much less than that, you've gained disproportionate political power. And what's causing underlying duress in the United States is shown by the data on this chart here. This shows over the next 40 years in 5-year increments what the anticipated percentages of some of the different races are. And we notice in 2020, the white race was just under 60%. And by 2030, which is now less than 10 years away, it should drop from 59.7 to 55.8. So that's better than 3, almost 4% drop. And so a lot of people that are counting on the white vote to carry the day, it's going to get more difficult. At the same time, some people fear the black vote, but look at the black community. It's not growing or projected to grow all that much. Where are the big changes occurring? Definitely the Hispanic vote. Look at the percentage, that's going up. Asian is going up some, but not a whole lot. And then the multiple races is going up. But 4% of a change in 10 years is enough to start flipping things if a particular racial group starts voting heavily in one way. All right. Some people may not like this cartoon, but I said, gotta be honest with it. Horton hatches the plot. I meant what I said, and I said what I meant. We're for voter fraud lies 100%. There's no denying it. The GOP is the party that is pushing the voter suppression acts. In fact, we'll see in a moment where 7 times as many voter suppression proposals have come forth in states in the last 2 or 3 years. 7 times what were being proposed 2 years ago. So it shows you that there's a tremendous surge in legislation to suppress voting. Okay, we've seen this chart before. This shows the population distribution in the United States. A high peak means more people there. And we can see that the population in the United States is not distributed homogeneously. And one of the keys to winning is to distribute. If you can distribute your votes more, you'll generally get more power. This means politically, because of the makeup of the Electoral College and the Senate, high urban areas and areas of high population have less political power. And to bring it home, here's another chart. The counties in blue are collectively represent 50% of the US population.
Wow.
Which means relatively a small number of counties carry the bulk of the United States population. So when you see red-blue maps by county and they're soaking in red, it doesn't necessarily tell you the results, because you can see that the just win all these counties by 100% and you got the election. That certainly shows the concentration of people. At the bottom of this chart is a good website to go to. It shows America's racial breakdown by state. And the white race is represented by the tan color there. The Hispanics are represented by the deeper orange, and the black citizens are represented by the blue. And this is actually the shape of the United States. In other words, here's Washington State up here in the corner. Here's Florida down here. And you can see where the racial distribution is not homogeneously spread out. I think the state with the lowest, here's a selective piece of that. Colorado has a 68% white population, 22% Hispanic, and only 4 or 5% black. So we really have a very small black population compared to a lot of other states. Georgia, where all the voter suppression information's been coming forth, the white race is down to 52% of the state of Georgia right now. The black population is at 31%. Hispanic is at 10%, and Asiatic 4%. So we can see where Georgia, particularly voter choices that want the white candidate, are having a more difficult time, although it's taking a long, long time to change. All righty. Okay, I mentioned the rural and small state built-in advantage in the political system. In the Senate, the top 9 populated states have 50% of the population. That means in the US Senate, half the population gets 18 senators, and the other half of the population gets 82 senators. That's incredibly disproportionate. And I don't know of any modern democracy in the world that has anything like this. It's so incredibly disproportional. Additionally, even the Electoral College is skewed, not as badly as the Senate, not nearly as badly as the Senate, but still badly skewed. And this is because you give a minimum of at least 1 electoral vote to every state, and you get 2 more tossed in as a bonus. And what this means is, if we rank the states by population, and this chart does that, it ranks the states from highest to lowest population. I can show you all of them if you're interested, but this just shows the top 13 states. And we can see that just by adding California and Texas together, that's what, over 20% of the US population. That means 1 in 5 Americans is either a Californian or a Texan. If you add in Florida, you're over 25%. So again, it's that disproportionality. Where's Colorado? But Colorado, by the way, is 21st in population. So we're near the middle. We're moving up quickly. We're at a population just under 6 million. So there's a good chance we'll get another congressional district when they announce the census results, and we probably will get another congressman to represent Colorado. But looking at this, if you win in the presidential election 50% of the population by winning those top 9 states, you've got 50.5% of the US population. You say, okay, we've won the popular vote, but have you won the electoral college vote? No. Win the top 9 states, get over 50% of the vote, and you're not there. You lose. You've only got 240 electoral votes. What do you need to get to 270? You need to grab 2 more states, that being, in this case, Michigan and New Jersey. And that gets you to a little over 56%. And that just gets you a winning electoral vote margin by 1. So this shows you that, again, the small states, and many of which are predominantly rural, do have disproportionate power. And it requires a candidate to win a disproportionate number of small states. You can lose the popular vote and still win the electoral college. Okay, here is currently the number of electoral votes that each state is granted. And there are 2 states, Maine and Nebraska, that split their electoral vote slightly. They say they'll give one of their electors to each congressional district. Those 2 states are Nebraska and Maine, so they kind of tend to cancel out. However, there are a couple states now that are talking about using proportional apportionment of their electoral vote. In other words, you would say, I've won the state of Texas, I get all 38 votes. But if you did it proportionally, you could split Texas' vote into, say, 18 for one candidate and 20 for the other. If you could do this to particularly your opponent's state, if you could take a couple of the larger particular states won by your opponent and split that vote so it's not winner take all, you could totally distort the election. For example, take California. If California spread its electoral vote proportionally, say it gave 35 to 20, that could give, in this particular election, the Republican Party another 20 electoral votes, and then take another couple states like New York and proportionally split that. You could really mess up the election. When I say mess it up, somebody could win by an incredibly disproportionate amount of the popular vote and still lose in the electoral college. Might this happen? Maybe. Right now, Nebraska, which currently splits its electoral vote by congressional district, is talking about making it a winner take all. Right now, the Democrats tend to win the Omaha congressional district in Nebraska and get one of the electoral votes in Nebraska. But if they do make that rule change, they could throw out that one Democratic vote. And New Hampshire is considering doing the same thing in the other direction, because New Hampshire as a whole tends to go just slightly Democratic, but its congressional districts proportionally always go one of each. So then this scares me that they could make the electoral college even more distorted by going to a apportioning kind of procedure.
Can I comment on that, please?
Go ahead, Terry.
The reason Nebraska did what they did was to prevent the populations of Omaha and Lincoln running the whole state. And by splitting their votes, it kept the popular vote from winning the state. And if Colorado did that, if we did it by our districts, it would prevent the Front Range districts from carrying the state. And we would lose control of the state if we did it by districts like Nebraska did.
If Colorado did it in this last election, apportioned its votes by congressional district and by the 2 senators, it would give 3 of Colorado's 8 electoral votes to the Republican Party. It would have been 5-3 instead of 8-0.
That's correct. But when Omaha changed theirs, it's not by popular vote. It allows the rural districts to control the state.
Yeah, although Nebraska has enough, Nebraska as a state as a whole always goes Republican solidly. It actually
That's because it's controlled by district, not by the popular vote.
Yeah, correct. Okay, jumping to this chart, this shows a case where you've got 60% blue precincts and 40% red precincts. If you draw the boundaries of the congressional district like this middle example, the blue wins and sweeps the table. Now I'm talking not electoral vote, but congressional districts. But if you divide it according to this jigsaw map, which is gerrymandering, you can rig it so that even though the blue had 60% of the precincts, the red gets 3 seats and the blue gets 2. So that shows you the power of gerrymandering if you can do it right. And the whole key is to try to pack as many votes of your opponent into one zone as possible. And I'm going to give us an example. I'm a native of Cincinnati. Ohio as a whole has 16 congressmen and 2 senators. There are 12 Republicans and 4 Democrats. The 4 Democratic districts are shown in blue. Notice this one came out off of the Lake Erie, but notice how carved up they are. And particularly in Cincinnati, the city of Cincinnati is basically Hamilton County, this strip right here, from here to here, here to here. And that went over 12% in favor of Joe Biden in this last election. But it was carved up so that this half of Cincinnati, the west or left part of it, was, look at that shape, was combined with this piece to split it up so that it became a Republican district. And this other piece of Cincinnati was carved out and thrown in with a big rural section that goes all the way over to Chillicothe, Ohio. So it's a classic example of how to gerrymander such that proportionately, Ohio has far more Republican representatives in Congress than Democrats by a ratio of 3 to 1.
A classic example of the politicians selecting their voters instead of the voters selecting the politicians.
Yeah.
Very destructive of our government.
Here's some other districts. How about some of these shapes? They have to, I guess there is a rule, they have to be contiguous, but look at that shape. Here's one in Pennsylvania, and I think this has been eliminated now, but it existed a few years ago. It was called Mickey Kicking Goofy.
Oh, yeah.
But this shows you what gerrymandering can do. And it's bad news. Okay. All right. So here are some key demographics in the Trump versus Biden election. And the key to manipulation in gerrymandering is understand where your opponent's votes If males only voted for president in the United States, and that happened up to at least 1918, I don't think a Democrat would have won the presidency in the last 30, 40 years. Because we can clearly see that Trump definitely won the male vote overall. But look at the female vote. Went for Biden by 57 to 36. There's a picture of Helen Reddy singing "I Am Woman." So if it wasn't for the women of the United States, we would have had a consistent string of Republican presidents. The white vote, if only the whites voted, Trump would have won. If only the non-whites would have voted, Biden would have won hands down. If the under 45 voted, clearly Biden won that group. And Biden just barely maybe won the 45 and over group. So again, we're not homogenous as an American nation. So to gain disproportionate power, and particularly if you want to try to get more conservative power, you want to try to get more white males to vote, older males to vote, rural folk to vote, strongly religious folk to vote, very high income folks to vote, and the highly neurotic and less open-minded to vote. Likewise, you want to try to suppress, if you're in the conservative side, the black and non-whites, the suburban and city women, the highly educated, the under 40, and the less religious. So you try to work to get your group an advantage. So what are the tools in the voter suppression toolbox? Well, here they are. You try to purge the voter rolls. In other words, go down through the rolls, and if somebody didn't vote in the last election, strike them off and throw them out. Make them find their way to the registration roll again by re-registering. You want to try to make registration more complex, harder to do, not online. Make you show up in person with a bunch of documents. Make the registration locations hard to get to, busy, only open limited hours. You want to have you want to eliminate entirely automatic and same-day registration, which we have in Colorado. You want the most rigid ID requirements you can. You want to try to get rid of, you want to have voting just be one day only and block all the early voting you possibly can. You want to have fewer voting locations. You want to have little or no mail-in balloting. You want to make sure anybody that's ever committed a felony never gets to vote again. And in the past, we don't have any of this today, poll taxes. They found in the South 40 years ago, they had a poll tax where you have to pay like $40, $50 to vote. And that disenfranchised the poor. And there were even some poor rural families in the South where the man and woman would get together and say, boy, $50 is tough. We'll just have one of us vote. And in a male patriarchal society, guess who that was? They only paid for the guy to vote. And the guy told his wife, well, honey, we don't have enough money this year to pay your poll tax. So that was another technique used. Okay. For those who are students of the Supreme Court and even the Voting Rights Act, there was the Voting Rights Act put forth in 1965, and it was renewed and amended many a time. And we could do an entire lesson.
I don't know why it's so darn cold under here.
On the Voting Rights Act. But it was reauthorized as recently as 2006. And there's a picture of then President George Bush with strong bipartisan support renewing the Voting Rights Act. Particularly Section 5 is what they call a pre-clearance mechanism. And it prevented at least 86 times subversion of voting rights between 1998 and 2013. But then came a Supreme Court ruling in 2013 that struck down Provision 5 of the Voting Rights Act. And within hours of that being struck down, Texas announced it would implement the nation's most strict voter ID law. And soon following, the states of Alabama, Arizona, Florida, Mississippi, North Carolina, and Virginia moved ahead with laws of theirs to essentially disenfranchise a lot of voters. So you can say I've got a Southern prejudice there with that cartoon, but it was definitely, you can see the land of Dixie putting in the voting suppression, and guess who they're trying to suppress? It's not Asians, it's not white folk, it's going after black voters. Okay. In that 2013 ruling with John Roberts, the head of the court, he said, he wrote the majority opinion. It was not a unanimous decision, but he said, things have changed dramatically in the South. We don't need this rule anymore that a state has to get some clearance from the federal government before voter suppression stuff is approved. He said, we've reached a point in American society where prejudice is gone and trying to suppress the vote is in the past, and the South is now a new society. Well, guess what? It's reared its ugly head again, big time, particularly in this last couple of weeks with what happened in Georgia. Just in the last several weeks, there's been at least 250, I'm now told it's gone over 300 bills put forth in at least 43 states that tighten rules for voting. And there's some pictures of voting lines. And again, they're trying to cut down absentee balloting, mail-in balloting, early balloting. And there's some that are even requiring multiple IDs, like we don't even just accept a birth or not a driver's license, but we want you to cough up a passport or a birth certificate as well. How's that for putting some suppression in there?
And they want to close the polls at 5 o'clock when people are getting off work.
So
wait till they come to the questions.
So try to get to cutting down on absentee ballots. You want to narrow the categories of voters allowed to vote absentee, shorten time windows, require more ID cards, forbid secretaries of state from automatically mailing out applications, and limiting counties to one ballot box. In Kansas in 2011, failed gubernatorial candidate Chris Kobach, at least he failed to win this last gubernatorial election in Kansas, championed a law requiring Kansas to show proof of citizenship in order to register to vote. And he wanted people to cough up a passport or birth certificate. And that law resulted in 30,000 Kansans being denied a vote. Fortunately, his political days were ended by Laura Kelly, a Democrat who successfully beat him in very red Kansas.
Ron,
All right, go ahead.
just a quick question, playing the devil's advocate. Why isn't it okay to just have U.S. citizens voting in U.S. elections?
I believe you have to be a U.S. citizen to vote in a U.S. election.
Why?
This is just showing.
Why can't you?
Proof.
Why is it bad to require proof of citizenship or other IDs of some kind?
I would say for your initial, I know in Colorado, when you initially apply, you have to show your driver's license, but a driver's license does not guarantee that you're a citizen. I think you have to make an affirmation that you're a citizen. But how many how many people have a birth certificate or a passport?
Good question.
Yeah, I think a significant percentage of white older people do, but I think there's a lot of blacks, Asians, and others who don't have at hand one of those documents.
And you have to pay to get.
You bring up a good point.
Well, it's just, of course, the side
Yeah.
that, the other side that they're arguing that it should be only citizens and people with valid IDs that can vote. So there's good arguments on both sides, but this whole discussion gets twisted toward our own sides.
One proposal is you have to present a driver's license, and all of us think that's no problem. But a lot of people don't have driver's licenses,
Yeah.
especially the poor. And so that would be one, if that's the rule, we're disenfranchising a lot of people, which I didn't realize till it was brought up to my attention. So.
Yeah. And I think there's been a couple states where they allowed as a secondary document, you could show you had a gun owner's license, but you could prove that was considered proof, but they didn't consider a student ID an acceptable identification. So you can see there they were trying to push the students out.
What the problem is, we're looking at this at the national elections. Most of these controls are for controlling local elections.
Didn't we have to have an envelope,
Okay.
a piece of mail with our address on it?
Okay.
What about a tax return?
You would think that would work.
Yeah, although
Non-residents have to file tax returns.
yeah,
What
there are
is-
some people that haven't had to file tax returns.
What is the rationale for requiring ID? Is it to show that you are who you actually are and prevent voting twice or three times, or what's the rationale for that?
I think the rationale for initially showing your ID is to show you are who you claim to be. And then after that, it's to prove you aren't somebody else going into the polls masquerading as someone else.
In North Carolina, North Carolina requires you to have a photo ID, and the Supreme Court upheld that requirement at their last election.
Okay.
Say, Ron, to me, I think about laws, most laws are in place to prevent some sort of inappropriate behavior, whether it's murder or rape or speeding or whatever. And in this case, these proposed laws are being put in place with no evidence of any misbehavior.
Good point. Yeah, I've registered voters in the past in Colorado. I've sat at a booth at Aurora Community College registering voters. And I can tell you that it's incredibly, it's hard to get people to even get interested in it. And to have some kind of a pandemic of illegal people trying to show up to vote is just not going to happen. In Texas, in Houston, they only allowed one ballot drop off in the whole county of Houston, I believe, to try to suppress the ballot drop off. And it was challenged in court, but the Texas Supreme Court, that is all Republican appointed people, upheld this rule, and they forced essentially almost the entire area around Houston to share one ballot box drop off. Okay. We're going to look now at HR1 in a minute. Another thing they've tried to do is outlaw private donations for election administration. Mark Zuckerberg donated money to allow counties to buy protective equipment, COVID protection stuff for ballot box, for election workers, to rent drop boxes and do other things. And some people have said, no, we don't want any contributions to make voting go smoother or safer. Okay.
Before you moved on, did you also see the Supreme Court case in Arizona? That are you familiar with that one?
I know. I've been following Arizona. We were fearful that they were going to put in a law saying the Arizona legislature could ignore the popular vote and just decide on how they were going to allocate the electoral vote.
Yeah, no, this is more around third party people, which is really common in the states. Third parties collect the votes, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court to say whether Arizona can in fact use third parties to collect the votes. And they say it's really going to be an important case that will just, if it goes the other way, God help us.
Okay. Quickly looking at the Black population by percentage, we mentioned that earlier, but we can see states that have these top two are not states, and you can see why the GOP doesn't want the District of Columbia to become a state, because they're very fearful that this could become a source of 2 Democratic senators. But we can also see the states where voter suppression is more likely to happen, where there are large percentages of particularly Black voters. Okay, let's move down here. This shows the distribution of Blacks in the United States as the percentage of population. And the highest areas are where we're in blue, and the lowest areas are the deeper reds. So we find far more of the Black America in the South and in the East, and we find very few Blacks generally in the Western United States, except for Texas, Nevada, few in Oklahoma. All right, I need to watch our time here. Quickly, the things that this For the People Act would do, which is sometimes called HR 1, it's in the Senate right now, and it has a very uphill fight, by the way. It would modernize voter registration, re-enfranchise felons to vote after they've served their time, strengthen absentee voting, institute nationwide early voting, and block deceptive practices. Interestingly enough, the U.S. is the only modern democracy puts the burden of registering and re-registering on the voters. And this law would modernize the system, and whenever you came in contact with like the driver's license agency or other state agencies, would allow you to digitally register voters, not have to do it by old paperwork. Some other things it would do, it would re-enfranchise felons. There's at least 2 states, Virginia might be changing it, but people in Kentucky right now, and I think still in Virginia, once you've got a felony, that's it. You can never vote again. And Florida had that provision recently, but the voters turned it down. So one of the things it would do is allow people that have served their time to re-register, not be permanently disenfranchised from voting for something they did when they were much younger. HR 1 would also strengthen absentee ballot capability, assures that every eligible voter has the right to vote by mail, requires states to provide postage paid envelopes, requires states to provide ballot boxes, and requires states to have online systems that check that their ballot has been received, accepted, and counted. I think we have that in Colorado now. You can go online and see, just like tracking an Amazon package, you can see if it's been shipped, or if it's in transit, or use postal service tracking, telling you where your package is. And here's a shot that says, Trump admits he opposed the UPS funding to stop mail-in voting. So
Ron,
that's, yeah,
this is the proposed House bill that would make
Yeah.
it nationwide, same voter laws nationwide. There's at
Exactly.
least these minimum requirements for every state.
exactly. It made it through the House, and it's now semi-stalled in the Senate. It's very questionable whether it'll garner enough votes to get through the Senate. We'll see. I'll be an optimist. Hope it will. HR 1 institutes nationwide early voting. By the way, holding elections only for one day on the first Tuesday of November is a relic from the 1880s to allow farmers to ride a buggy to the county seat. And HR 1 would mandate early voting at least 2 weeks before Election Day and require a certain number of voting locations per 1,000 voters. As we mentioned, Texas, a couple counties there only had one voting location, requiring people to drive sometimes hours or more to get to. It would also block deceptive practices. There were cases, and there still are, where somebody will go door to door and put out a notice telling people to go to the wrong precinct to vote.
Oh.
So this criminalizes that activity. Okay, well, I've talked enough, so let's get into some good discussion here. What do you folks think? Do you? And I want to start by saying I'm really proud of Colorado. I think our system here is extremely good. We've done it now for many years. We're not finding any examples or no significant number of attempts to commit fraud or election distortion. It's worked well. I know I enjoy being able to sit down at the kitchen table, particularly with the issues and the amendments, and carefully look them over, do research, think it over, check and mark my ballot carefully, not worry about the weather on the Tuesday after I get home from work. So I'm really proud of Colorado.
Ron, it's been a long time since I've taken a civics class. How do they determine gerrymandering? Who does?
Gerrymandering goes back a couple hundred years. Somebody just figured it out that if you've got to cut your state or your city into districts, to carve it up to your advantage. And again, the strategy is pack as many of the opposing votes in one clump as you can, and that gives you a better chance of winning the other.
But who determines that? I mean, how are they made? The
The
districts?
state legislatures, right, Ron? Not the Congress.
It varies from state to state, and Colorado a couple of years ago passed a law to try to get a more representative method of getting people from both parties and a good solid block of independents to participate in the redistricting committee.
For an update on that all the people for the congressional and the legislative redistricting committees have now been appointed in Colorado. And the big question, the law required that the redistricting occur within a certain period of time. And with the census being delayed, will they be able to get the redistricting done by the time that the requirement of the law is required? And that's going to be an interesting dilemma. The other thing that I would like to comment on is when you have gerrymandering, because you're forcing all of people that are viewing it the same way in the same committees or same districts, then what that does is fosters extremists on both sides. So that rather than getting more moderate stuff, highly gerrymandered places gets much more extreme voting.
I'd like to comment on what Colorado in Chaffee County. Anybody know where that county is? Chaffee County?
I know it's west of here.
Right.
Buena Vista area.
No, it's Pagosa Springs, basically.
Okay.
And what they only allowed, the county commissioners only allowed one drop box. It had, you could only use it during daylight hours because they didn't want you killing the deer and elk that you might hit on the roads going to that drop box.
Okay.
Ron, I have a question. It's Karen Alexander. Will HR 1, does it have any pieces in there regarding gerrymandering is the first question. The second question is, we got census information in the mail again. We filled out the census information several months ago, and then we got more information in the mail. Are we supposed to go through and redo that? Is there any update on that?
Well, to answer your two questions, number one, I'm unaware of anything in HR 1 dealing with gerrymandering, since those district drawings are under the control of the states. On the second question, I'm unaware of any continued work being done on the census. I thought the workers had finished their field work and the mail inquiries, and I was unaware that they're still doing some of it. You have to research it further.
We got a very official looking census document in the mail in the past week. So I just was surprised to see it. And I haven't done any research yet to see what we're, if it's legit or not.
I would try to call the Census Bureau and find out. I don't know.
Okay. Thanks.
I think another consequence of the gerrymandering is that it heavily favors the incumbent, makes it very difficult to defeat an incumbent in these districts.
All right. Other comments?
I have one. Regarding the new Georgia law, am I missing something? How can you make it illegal to provide water or food to people who are waiting in line?
Well, there is a rule saying you're not allowed to distribute election not information, but you can't hand out flyers to people waiting in a voting line. I know that, but
water.
But yeah, what a terrible thing when people are forced to wait in a line. It's maybe 2 hours long, and you tell people you can't give them a donut, a cup of coffee, or a bottle of water.
Colorado has that law. When we used to have voting at voting places, only the people in the line, there could be nobody within a certain distance of those people waiting in line. That was Colorado law. And I was election judge, and I had to go out there to make sure that there was no other people near the people within a certain distance of the people in the line.
What about children?
That's what I heard last night on television, that Georgia has a law where you have to stay so many feet away from people in line to vote.
Colorado used to do that too.
Gotta
And
make
the-
sure those people suffer in that line and endure the hot
Hey.
sun and don't get discouraged.
I have a question. People who have to stand in line for 8 hours, or I mean, even 2 or 3 hours. What if you have to use the bathroom? Do they provide outhouses or porta pots, or what do they do in those situations when they've got hundreds of people in line forever?
They want you to go home and not take the time to vote. That's the reason they do that. They limit number of voting places so the line is long that you, when you show up, you look at it and just turn around and leave.
Yeah.
I had a really disgusting dream last night about that whole thing.
A voting during, well, please don't tell us the details, Linda. It's interesting to me, since we're a church class, looking at this from a Christian perspective, that folks, especially in the South, who are religious and take their religion seriously, can at the same time promote these suppression tactics and have no conscience problem with doing that. You know, it just seems to me, I've given my own opinion, that they ought to be thinking, what's fair? What would Christ do to be fair to all voters? And it's sad to see things that truly are trying to suppress voters from being able to do their constitutional right.
The Southern Baptists in their last conference that was just held not too long ago suppressed not allowing women to serve on a number of their committees and that.
Well, it's actually a revitalization of Jim Crow laws, is it not?
Well, it seems to be, but of course, the conservatives that support these suppression laws have their reasons. They say they are genuinely trying to stop voter fraud and people from voting who shouldn't be, and they're just trying to make the system more responsible.
Yeah, but that's just saying it's a solution in looking for a problem, really. That's how I see it.
It's, to me, it seems kind of basic too, Ron. You, in that one graphic, you showed most white males are voting Republican. So that suppress everyone else.
Uneducated white males are voting Republican.
But you know what I'm saying? I'm saying, according to that graph they're showing, you know, when he showed that, you know, it's like, it seems that's what they're trying to do, suppress everybody but white males.
Right. It's fear-based identity politics at its worst.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's not just the US that has this problem. My sister lived in Switzerland for, I don't know, 25 years. And when she arrived there in the late 60s, she discovered there was one ballot per family. And guess who got their vote? So that has since changed, but you know, a lot of countries are dealing with problems.
Switzerland was almost the last
Maybe
democracy.
it would make a difference who picked up the mail first.
Well, there you go.
I saw on the news the other day on a talk show that the white males that had voted Republican may be changing their attitude about voting Republican and switch back to being a Democrat because the Republicans did not bring back their jobs.
Oh, wouldn't that be nice?
Good question. Well, we're over time, everybody. Another great presentation from Ron. Thank you so much, Ron. And we will see you next week.
Okay, Steve, do you want to hang on? I wanted to talk to you about a few.
Sure. Sounds good. I'll stay a while.
Thank you, Ron.
Everybody.
Fabulous.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Everybody have a good week.
You
You
too.
too.
Thanks.